This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. A lot has happened this week, and we're going to go in depth a bit, but here's what you need to know right now. Even though businesses are reopening and rehiring, nearly 2 million people applied for unemployment benefits last week. The total number of people who are out of work is now at 21.5 million, which is still really high, but rehiring is partially making up for the continued layoffs due to the coronavirus. The special prosecutor in Georgia for the Ahmaud Arbery case said the men accused of killing Arbery hunted him down and ultimately executed him. This and other evidence was presented to support murder charges against the men who attacked Arbery on February 23rd. The first of 3 memorials for George Floyd is taking place in Minneapolis today, a day after 4 police officers faced new charges in Floyd's death. Other memorials will take place in Rayford, North Carolina, and Houston, Texas. Demands for justice for George Floyd and other victims of police brutality have had a long journey. Protests started in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and have since circled the globe. In some cities, protests have reignited calls for justice from cases that some have overlooked or just completely forgotten. Newsy's Ben Chamiso explains how a stateside protest movement has gone international.
Anger over George Floyd's death is reverberating loudly around the globe. Thousands of people worldwide are protesting racism and police abuse at home under Floyd's banner. In Paris, 20,000 people on Tuesday showed support to US protesters and denounced the 2016 death of a black man in French police custody. The case is still under judicial investigation. In Australia, Floyd's death has renewed calls to investigate police brutality against Indigenous Australians.
There's over 400 plus Indigenous deaths in custody that are not being investigated or any further.
In Cape Town, protesters connected Floyd's death with the alleged killing of a South African man by soldiers enforcing lockdown restrictions. So how did Floyd's death in US police custody spark such a massive international movement?
What's happening in America is just a more extreme version of what's happening around the world.
Birmingham City University professor Kaindi Andrews says the video of the incident struck a nerve among minorities across the globe because it was all too familiar.
There's huge problems in Europe and the UK in particular with police brutality. So, it feels close to home.
Andrews says European countries tend to look at racial conflicts in the US to better understand what's wrong with their own societies.
America is this perfect place where you can just see the reality of racism.
Thousands of people demonstrated in London twice this week following Floyd's death.
Black lives have always mattered. We have always been important.
The sustained outrage in the UK makes sense to Andrews. He says minorities on both sides of the Atlantic feel increasingly oppressed.
Generally, if you look at the people leading America and Britain, very right-wing, very openly aggressive in their posture towards immigrants and on race issues. When you have someone, what Malcolm X called the wolf, you just openly in your face and telling you how it is, you're more likely to respond.
And then there is America's soft power. Terence Fitzgerald of the University of Southern California says international protest movements often start in the US. He points to how oppressed populations have long used the US civil rights movement as a blueprint for their own uprisings.
We have been the leaders in terms of stretching, redefining this living idea of democracy.
Fitzgerald says as a black man, he finds the global outpouring sad and reassuring at the same time.
More than anything, it's in a sense comforting that you're not alone, but that you share in this bond of oppression.
Ben Chamiso, Newsy, Chicago.
Businesses have been reopening with special conditions, but there's one that's kind of slipping through the cracks. We'll tell you more in a bit.
Sure. Memes and cat videos are fun, but actual news might be a bit more useful. Follow Newsy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get straightforward, opinion-free news right on your social news feed.
Native women have told me that what you do when you raise a daughter is you prepare her for what to do when she's raised, not if, but when.
Why are we different than every other person? Why don't we have the justice everybody else does?
If you go to a restaurant right now, odds are there will be some kind of cap on how many customers they can serve. But if you hop on an airplane, all bets are off. Airlines are under no restrictions on how many passengers they can put in the air. For Newsy's virology series, Teak Root looked into who should be writing the rules for airlines and what the lack of those rules means for public health.
As many businesses reopen, restrictions often limit the number of customers they can serve. But it turns out, not for airlines, an industry that has received billions in relief funding.
There's no rules right now regarding coronavirus and capacity on airplanes. The Department of Transportation hasn't come out with any guidelines itself. So airlines have set their own rules.
Data acquired by Newsy shows that airlines are using that autonomy to fill planes back up, leading to complaints about crowded flights. Airlines for America represents most major US airlines, and in March, the organization started putting out data on how the coronavirus has impacted the industry. In 2019, domestic flights were about 85% full. By April, that number had dropped below 10%. But as airlines cut flights and customers slowly started to fly again, planes began to fill back up. Then, suddenly, A4A stopped including this load factor data in their coronavirus updates. The organization says they stopped including the number because it was being misconstrued with the financial health of the industry. But it came as TSA checkpoints were seeing increased traffic, and passengers were turning to social media to post about unexpectedly packed flights. In response, United has started alerting passengers when their flights are expected to be more than 70% full, and giving them options to change. American Airlines followed suit. Other carriers say they are aiming to keep capacity at about 2/3 by not selling middle seats. But data on how full flights are isn't made public in real time. Only after Newsy requests did A4A provide updated average load data across the industry. Flights are now, on average, 48.6% full. That's a more than 5-fold increase in less than 2 months.
And I think very quickly we're going to start seeing these flights 80 to 90% and more full.
That's Lauren Wolf, counsel for Travelers United, a consumer advocacy group.
Airlines make their money when the planes are full.
Airlines and some academics argue that advanced air filters, encouraged mask use, and extra cleaning measures can greatly mitigate risk. But even members of Congress have found themselves on packed flights, and some lawmakers are calling on the Department of Transportation to do more. Senator Maria Cantwell recently wrote Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao asking the department to provide clear guidance to airlines. A4A pointed to the Centers for Disease Control as the more appropriate agency to put in place load limits or other public health restrictions.
So who's our regulator? It's essentially the CDC. CDC absolutely has public health authority. If they chose to regulate something like that, they could.
The CDC told Newsy that it does not regulate the airline industry and recommends avoiding non-essential travel. The agency's website says that while most viruses and other germs do not spread easily on flights, crowded flights make social distancing difficult and may increase your risk for exposure to the virus that causes COVID-19. Still, A4A insists that flying full flights is safe.
There are some flights with load factors of over 70%, and it's completely safe. Absolutely safe, or else we wouldn't be flying.
In the meantime, A4A's daily updates still don't include data on how full planes are, and passengers continue to report crowded flights.
Some companies are talking a good game about social justice while leaving the goalposts untouched when it comes to racial equity. We'll explain.
We're working remotely, but our mission hasn't changed.
Newsy's here for you.
Newsy is here for you from our living rooms
and our kitchens.
24/7.
Focused on facts and not hype. Be informed,
not influenced.
The number of African migrants arriving at Mexico's southern border has soared. Immigration officials tag African migrants entering Mexico as apatrida, or stateless.
Unions can help police negotiate higher pay and better working conditions. But critics say some unions can also shield police from accountability. Newsy's Kat Sandoval explains.
He can't breathe! He can't breathe!
The death of George Floyd and the ongoing protests have spotlighted the need for police reform. Change could start with police union contracts, because critics say some union protections create barriers to hold officers accountable, like this.
There's no other person who you would think of would be accused of crime that you would wait 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours before you could have a chance to even speak to them. They would have a chance to review the body cam video before they're even interviewed about what happened in the event.
That's Jonathan Smith, executive director of the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs. He's overseen 22 police department investigations when he was a U.S. Justice Department attorney, including the civil investigation of the Ferguson, Missouri Police Department after the death of Michael Brown. He says union contracts nationwide keep allegations of police misconduct hidden from the public. In some cases, past records are disregarded when officers seek promotions.
The officer in the Floyd case had, a pattern of allegations of misconduct that had been made against him.
The officer seen pressing his knee into Floyd's neck, Derek Chauvin, had 15 complaints against him, and most were dismissed without punishment, according to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. What the officer was accused of has not been made public. A University of Chicago study found that after Florida allowed police to unionize, there was an uptick in violent misconduct complaints against officers, from 0.5 incidents per year to 0.7. But without national transparency, it's hard to know which officers have records. And to add to that, sometimes disciplinary actions take years.
In Portland, Oregon, the contract there was so complicated and so Byzantine, and there were so many steps in officer discipline that from the time that an allegation of misconduct took place to the time that the department could actually impose discipline took more than 2 years.
Now let's be clear. Police unions say they protect due process for members. They also bargain for better pay and better working conditions. A union officer makes 40% more than a non-member. But in the fight for their members, are unions' overprotection of their members at the cost of civilian lives? Newsy reached out to the National Association of Police Organizations, which represent various police unions, and they gave no comment. Smith says our system of policing has been built over decades, and reform is going to take time.
I think there is an expectation that this problem is going to get solved more quickly than it can be. When I've seen police departments actually struggle with reform, it doesn't take a year or two. It takes 5 or 10 or more years to actually bring about the kind of fundamental change that we need.
Kat Sandoval, Newsy, Chicago.
I'm going to do some laps around this empty office to get my exercise in for the day, but hang tight. Not all disinformation is created equal. Our award-winning Newsy Bellingcat series unpacked the rumors and outright falsehoods floating around about the coronavirus. Knowing what's true and what's not could be key to staying healthy in the pandemic.
You've probably seen at least one of these messages about coronavirus. You might have even shared one. But what you might not know is that they are all part of another kind of contagion, proliferating in parallel and adding confusion to fear. As the coronavirus has spread across the world, so too has disinformation about it. Some of it resembles the classic email chain letter, circulating from one person to the next on social media. But other disinformation is more nefarious, coming from governments attempting to distract from their own domestic problems by shifting blame for the virus elsewhere. As the pandemic escalates, knowing what kind of disinformation you've come across and how to avoid passing it on is just as important as washing your hands. Newsy and Bellingcat are here to help.
I would say that all of the disinformation I've seen can be sorted into one of four kind of broad categories.
This is Robert Evans, an investigative journalist with Bellingcat. He's been watching the rapid spread of disinformation surrounding the coronavirus.
There's generic disinformation. There's disinformation that comes from credible sources spreading bad information, either accidentally or on purpose. There's fake sources attempting to appear credible spreading disinformation. And then you've got straight up grifters.
The generic disinformation includes stuff you'd see in any high-profile disaster, like a hurricane or terrorist attack. For instance, in early March, a video started circulating claiming to show a crowd of people mobbing an Aldi grocery store in the Netherlands to hoard items. The thing is, it was actually a video from Germany in 2011. When it comes to credible sources spreading disinformation, it can take one of two forms. The first is credible sources sharing disinformation accidentally. For example, a staff writer at The Atlantic shared what seemed to be a memo from a University of California panel of experts. Turns out the memo was a hoax, and the staff writer ended up deleting the tweet. The other form is credible sources spreading disinformation intentionally, like when a Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson suggested that the coronavirus was brought to China by the U.S. military.
Government officials directly insinuating that COVID-19 is some sort of U.S. bioweapon. That's the same line that Alex Jones and InfoWars have been pushing for months now.
It is an engineered man-made bioweapon. That's confirmed. They don't want that discussed. This is an attack.
So you've got both officials with the Chinese government spreading this and like the least credible people in the U.S. media ecosystem spreading it. It's a very odd situation.
While credible sources spreading disinformation is problematic on its own, there are also people posing as credible sources spreading disinformation. People like this guy.
It's not the virus that kills you or harms you. It is the overreaction of the immune system because we have weakened and dysfunctional immune systems.
Dr. Shiva claims, among other things, that the so-called deep state is using coronavirus to manipulate the markets. His remarks ended up being quoted by Sean Hannity on his radio show.
There's an MIT guy I noticed on Twitter. He said, quote, coronavirus fear mongering by the deep state will go down in history as one of the biggest frauds to manipulate economies, suppress dissent, and push mandated medicines.
He's not a member of the MIT faculty. He's not a credible person to comment on virology in any way, shape, or form. But because people say, oh, this is the inventor of email, and he's a doctor, and he's associated with MIT, they take it seriously when they really shouldn't. And he's spreading, dangerous disinformation.
The last kind of disinformation going around right now is that coming from profiteers, or people out to make a profit off the crisis.
This influenza, you're saying that silver solution would be effective.
It's been tested on other strains of the coronavirus.
Whether this virus is super deadly or not, they're using the crisis that has come with it to take over and have power and control.
These people have been around for a while, and the coronavirus is just the most recent disaster that they're exploiting.
So check that checklist off to get high-quality storable food.
For them, the more fake information that's out there about the virus, the more they're able to sell whatever they think people will buy to stay safe.
The less people know for certain about what's actually happening, the more uncertainty in general there is, the more room all these people have to operate and to sell their nonsense and to draw people into their web.
This is just a small sample of the kind of disinformation spreading during the coronavirus pandemic. Some of it is coming from bad actors who just want to sow chaos, while other false or misleading messages are coming from governments trying to control the flow of information. The best thing you can do to avoid falling for one of these false claims is to verify information with official sources, like the WHO or the CDC.
This is going to be, I would say, the greatest challenge journalism has faced worldwide since the Iraq War. It is all of our jobs in the media to keep an eye on this stuff, to be watching around the world for when disinformation breaks out, and to try to clamp down on it as quickly and effectively as possible. Because nothing is going to cause more damage in this situation than bad information.
All right, I'm going to log off for the next few days. Let's be honest, we all kind of need it. But we'll be back with more In the Loop Monday. But don't go anywhere just yet. More top stories are coming your way.